Miguel moved up beside him, his movements cat-like and silent. He looked down into the valley, where a thin, wispy trail of wood smoke was beginning to rise from a cluster of scrub oak miles below. "There they are," Miguel whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind's whistle. Down in the valley, a camp was beginning to wake. Men were moving between horses, their forms tiny but unmistakable. Even from this distance, the glint of sunlight hitting polished badges and the long barrels of state-of-the-art rifles was clear. 20 men, Mateo confirmed, his jaw tightening. They aren't just a posse. As they finally spilled out onto the northern flats, a desolate expanse of salt-crusted earth and stunted greasewood, the heat began to rise in shimmering curtains. But the heat wasn't the only thing vibrating in the desert air. "We're being hunted," Miguel whispered, his hand drifting to the carbine scabbard on his saddle. He didn't turn his head. He simply watched the horizon in his peripheral vision. Mateo nodded, his eyes fixed on a cluster of boulders a half-mile back. He's been there since the Rio Grande, a ghost in the scrub. With a sharp jerk of the reins, Mateo pivoted his charcoal stallion. They rode back into their own dust, the sun at their backs. As they closed the distance, a figure emerged. He was young, barely 20, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that held the hollow, haunted look of a man who had seen the bottom of a dry well. He was dressed in rags of buckskin and carried an old, rusted Hawken rifle that looked more like a club than a firearm. This was Raul. To the villagers, he was the lone wolf Orphan, a boy who lived on the periphery of the village, surviving on lizard meat and stolen corn. The 13 knew him. They had seen him lurking near their campfires since they were children, but he had always been kept at a distance by a mother whose fear was greater than her poverty.
José Maciel. My mother is dead, Mateo.
A rattlesnake. She went to the well at dusk because I was too lazy to go. Because I wanted to sleep in the shade of the patio and let the day's heat drain from my bones. I was a selfish pup, Mateo. I let her walk into the dark alone. I found her that night by Limestone Cistern. Or
I found what was left. The poison had taken her quick, but the desert, it takes what it wants afterward. The coyotes had been at her for hours. They don't leave much but the hair, the splintered bone, and the turquoise beads of her necklace scattered in the silk.
"My uncle, her brother, found me wailing in the dirt 2 days later," Raul said, his voice growing steady with a cold, newfound steel. "He told me the truth before I packed my kit. He told me why she hid me in the cellar whenever you riders came near, why she never let me speak your names or look at the stars. She spent her whole life trying to wash the scent of the noose off me. She didn't want me to be a bad man. She didn't want me to end up like the coward who sired me." "My father was Reno," Raul declared, the name hanging in the air like a curse. Mateo looked down at the boy, seeing for the first time the familiar, desperate fire behind those dark eyes, the same fire that burned in the veins of the 13 men behind him. The lone wolf had finally found his pack. Joaquin and Elias exchanged a long, sobering look. Reno had been one of the original cowards, a man whose name was whispered in the same breath as the rope. To see his seed standing here, forged in the tragedy of his mother's gruesome death, stirred a dark, ancestral recognition in the men. Later that night, after he joined the group, "He wants the brand," Mateo announced to the group. "He wants to ride for Fort Grant. He wants to avenge a life lived in the dirt." "We are 13, Santiago argued. though his voice lacked its usual bite. 13 is the number of the Noose. Adding another, it changes the luck. His mother was eaten by the desert because of his pride, Miguel countered. That is a weight a man carries. It makes him sharp. It makes him lethal. Let the brothers vote, Mateo commanded. One by one, the men raised their calloused hands. 12 hands went up into the bruised purple light of the dusk. Mateo looked at Raul, then slowly raised his own hand. Without a word, Mateo reached into his heavy leather satchel and pulled out the branding iron, the jagged, twisted shape of the broken noose. He thrust it into the center of the small, white-hot fire they had built beneath the mesquite trees. "This isn't a badge of honor, boy," Mateo growled. "It's a death warrant. If you take this, you don't die as a man. You die as a bastard. Do you understand?" Raul didn't flinch. He bared his forearm, the pale skin shivering in the cold canyon wind. "I've been dead since the night I found her at the well. Mark me." 14, Luis whispered, looking at the brand. Mateo tossed the iron back into the dirt and looked north. "Get him a horse and a real rifle. We have a town to burn, and now we have a ghost to help us do it." The sound of thunder can be heard in the distance, as the flash of lightning flashes in the clouds of a distant, growing thunderstorm. The men broke camp the next morning, and on the way to Alamo City, they split up. Raul was given his first duty as one of the bastards. He was given some silver pieces and told to find as much kerosene oil as he could carry, and meet by high noon at the saloon. Raul, the newest of the pack, rode hard ahead of the main group. He moved like a sliver of darkness, his mount's hooves muffled by the soft sand of the flats. His instructions were simple but scorched with intent. Find the liquid fire. He needed kerosene, lamp oil, or any combustible fluid the town of St. Alamo held within its stores. He was to scout the shops on foot, leaving his horse tied at the St. Alamo Saloon, and gather intelligence while the others moved in behind him. Mateo and Miguel had divided the remaining 13 into 2 separate cells to avoid the prying eyes of any border patrol. Mateo led 6 men through the dry arroyos to the west, while Miguel took the remaining 5 along the jagged spine of the eastern ridge. They moved with a predatory patience, their bolero hats pulled low against the rising wind, their union overcoats buttoned tight to hide the brands of the broken noose that marked their forearms. The storm finally broke just as the 2 groups converged on the outskirts of St. Alamo. The clouds tore open, releasing a torrential, cold deluge that turned the dust of the main street into a thick, sucking soup of red mud. It was a stroke of bastard luck. The rain drove the townspeople indoors, clearing the boardwalks and leaving the streets to the stray dogs and the 14 ghosts who had come to haunt them. Miguel led his group toward the sulphurous heat of the blacksmith's forge and the oily scent of the gunsmith's shop. They moved through the shadows, trading their stolen silver for fresh steel, and having their rifles serviced by men who didn't ask questions, as long as the coin was good. The ring of the blacksmith's hammer was swallowed by the rolling thunder, providing a perfect mechanical mask for their preparations. Across the street, Mateo and his men stepped into the warmth of the barber shop. The air inside was thick with the scent of bay rum, lilac water, and hot steam. They sat in the heavy leather chairs, letting the barbers drape them in white linens, a stark contrast to the grime of the trail.
"Keep it close,"
Mateo whispered to his brothers, his eyes fixed on his own reflection as a hot towel was pressed to his face. The St. Alamo Saloon was a cathedral of vice and wood smoke, a refuge from the deluge outside. Inside, the atmosphere was thick enough to chew on. A pretty singer with hair the color of sunset stood near the stage, her voice a sultry melodic lament that drifted over the clink of glasses and the low murmur of desperate men. Around her, a dozen other women, the Madame's 13 singing sisters, moved through the crowd, their silk dresses rustling like corn husks in the wind. At the battered upright piano sat Paulo, an Italian with a face like a crumpled map. He moved his fingers across the keys with a frantic, stuttering brilliance, his eyes darting toward the door with every gust of wind. Paulo was a man escaping a manslaughter charge from a world away, convinced that the long arm of the Italian law could reach even into the Chihuahua Desert. He smoked a thick, pungent cigar.
Keep the music playing.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And the next burning swallow of spirits. Mateo and Miguel's groups met outside the swinging doors, their overcoats dripping. They stepped inside as one, a wall of dark leather and hard eyes.
Enjoy the journey. The views and narratives presented in this video and across this channel are works of fiction and are intended purely as an exploration of an alternate reality. Nothing shared here is presented as fact, nor is it meant to predict the future or dictate your personal beliefs. We encourage all viewers to use their own critical reasoning to form their opinions.